All right, all right. Happy Sunday, ladies and gentlemen, and happy holidays. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Katie Halper. You guys are very familiar with her. She is the co-host of Useful Idiots, and she's the host of the Katie Halper Show. Welcome back, Katie. Let's go ahead and bring you in.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
And I think you have a special guest you want to introduce.
I do. Yeah. Let me hold on one second. Come here. Here's my very needy, dependent, adorable new pup. We just named him Bucky after Bucky Pizzarelli. And he's a rescue. We adopted him. He's so sweet. And he's not great at entertaining himself. Like my parents have a dog. And if you just give her a toy, she licks it. And she is very food motivated. We got to find him some stuff to do. But anyway, this is him. And he likes to sit on my lap or run around. And the other day, I actually introduced him to Susan Abu Hawa, the great Palestinian writer. And for people who don't know, Susan is not only an amazing novelist and activist, but she's been to Gaza twice since October 7th. She's also a big animal rights advocate. And she works with an animal organization called Sulala in Palestine that helps feed and take care of and rescue and treat animals. And it's really, we talked about this on my show the other day, but it's really amazing. You have these people who are themselves really food insecure, and yet they care about animals, and they make sure that they feed them, or you see them literally risking their lives going back into buildings that have been bombed and to get the animal, the cat, dog, and then you see them digging them out of the rubble. So anyway.
Oh my gosh. Well, Bucky's so cute.
Thanks. Yeah. He's named after Bucky Pizzarelli, the jazz guitarist who my grandparents really liked.
Wow. All right. Well, Katie, we have a couple of things I want to discuss. I know he's so adorable.
Major underbite too. We were going to maybe call him Luigi, but we didn't want him to get arrested.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. So speaking of New York, I mean, obviously, it's probably really cold there. It's really, really cold here.
It's 20 something right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's freezing outside. But I know that one of the things I did want to talk to you about was the presidential election. Obviously, we all know what happened, but something interesting happened this time around, particularly in New York City. It was AOC, I think, that put this message out there that some of her constituents that voted for her also voted for Donald Trump. I also saw in some of the New York surveys that it looks like Donald Trump increased his support, particularly in New York City. And I want to hear from you about that. You're in New York. Why do you think that is? Why do you think this time around some of the New Yorkers decided to vote for Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think it's more of a general trend. I don't know. I'm not a local politics expert. Obviously, I do live in New York City, but I do think that what you saw kind of across the board was people, and I did get a sense of this actually just talking to people in New York City, talking to people who work delivering packages or are Lyft drivers or cab drivers or people I would just strike up conversations with. They didn't like the status quo. They really saw Biden and Harris as part of the status quo. You also, I think, had something where, Nina Turner said this about Hillary and Trump and Bernie in 2016. I think it really holds true, which is that Bernie felt people's pain. Trump pretended to feel people's pain. And no one really believed that Hillary felt people's pain. And I think that with Kamala Harris, there's the policy question, but just in terms of messaging and affect, I don't think anyone really felt like she was even aware of people's pain, much less kind of had empathy towards it. She was upset about certain things that I think are important, like reproductive rights, but she didn't really seem to have any empathy for people, what they were going through. And I actually think Biden is full of it, but Biden's better at faking it. Biden's better at pretending to be in touch, Scrappy Joe from Scranton. At the same time, he tells his donors nothing would fundamentally change. But I think he's a better messenger. Just like Bill Clinton, for instance, also full of it, but a better messenger than Hillary. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Right. I will say that I think Bill Clinton was a little bit more charismatic than
Yeah.
Hillary
Right.
Clinton was.
Yeah, and even among people of color without a college degree, Harris performed 26 points worse than Clinton did in 2016,
Yep.
which is crazy. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's according to New York Magazine article. Yeah.
I think some of that had to do with the economy as well. I know a lot of people in New York City have been complaining about, of course, the rent, which isn't
Right.
new, but from what I understand now, after the pandemic, it was even harder for people to get an apartment in New York City. They increased some of the requirements, from what I understand. Similar here towards Boston as well. Like they increased the requirements to make it a little bit more difficult for people to get apartments. So I know housing was another issue that I heard people mention, but the economy seems like it was a big one just all across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that part of it was, I mean, you know me, I'm not reluctant at all to criticize Biden or Harris. I do think to be fair, certain things were outside of their control, like inflation, but they needed to talk about that and explain it. They can't just say, "Oh, it doesn't matter," because when you take a look at this statistic and that statistic, it actually, when you adjust for this, that, the other, the economy's fine. Like that's not how you're going to win people over. So you know, like I think it was, you know, also there was that article, I think in the Atlantic, right, where you had people from the Biden campaign or Biden administration saying that Kamala Harris was starting to go after antitrust stuff. And then her brother-in-law, Tony West, who is an executive at Uber, told her to stop doing that. And, you know, even people who are very wonkish and would say to me, oh, but she did this thing or she did that thing. She put together this policy. Like, there's policy and then there's messaging. And I don't think most people know what was her signature issue? Like what was her signature issue? And we saw with the Luigi Mangione shooting, you know, healthcare, that issue is something that's bipartisan. People don't like the idea that if you don't have enough money, you are sentenced to death, basically, in our country, you know, the richest country in the world. And what was her answer to that? Like, I don't remember her having a big thing on that, except that she moved away from Medicare for all, as we know. And I think that, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, Democrats like to pretend that they're forced to do things because of Republicans, or they're forced to do things like, oh, I love this idea, it's just too radical, the rest of the country isn't there. And it's really because they don't like those things.
Right. That's the other thing, too, I noticed in particular, or I think with Kamala and with Biden, it seemed like they were more willing to please Republicans than to please their own base. Like, I don't know who it was that was a part of Kamala's campaign that thought it was a good idea to add Liz Cheney to that campaign. I thought that was ridiculous. But somehow they thought this was going to be a good idea. Like, I feel like they totally ignored like the left or the progressives that are still willing to participate in the Democratic Party. They totally ignored those policies.
Yeah. Yeah. They think, I mean, this is funny because Lawrence O'Donnell famously said, right, like, I worked in the Senate and the left has no place to go. And so you don't listen to the left when they have no place to go. He said that. And of course, then he also made a video, you know, did one of his reports totally demonizing Jill Stein, even though by his logic, Jill Stein is doing what needs to be done. But yeah, I think that with another thing that you saw with the campaign was a real failure to, as I just said, articulate anything. And what did you just say? Sorry, my mind, I just lost my train of thought because my dog scratched me. You just said something. What did you just said?
Her adding like Liz Cheney to be a part of her campaign.
Yes. And here's the thing. Okay, I think that the left, liberal, everyone underestimates this about Trump. Trump, I think his biggest strength is that he can be as hypocritical as he wants to be. Because when Trump is a hypocrite, his hypocrisy isn't hypocritical. Because he doesn't pretend to be an ideologue. He doesn't pretend to be consistent. He doesn't pretend to be moral. His whole shtick is kind of like, I'm going to work the system. I'm going to cheat. And I want you to cheat too. And I'm going to cheat for you. Right? Now, everyone else basically in politics, I would say, I think literally everyone else pretends to be moral, pretends to be ideological, pretends to be principled. So when they're hypocrites, their hypocrisy is hypocritical. So we saw this with Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton, he called her out for talking about super predators, which, as everyone knows, was a totally coded or not coded racist free terminology, right?
Yeah.
So he called her out on that in the debate. But what's fascinating is that this is a guy who took out an ad in the newspaper, in the Daily News, calling for the death penalty for the alleged Central Park Five. Now, if this was someone who had any claims to consistency or principles, Hillary Clinton could have been like, yeah, well, what about what you did? You're going to call me racist? Look what you did. But none of his supporters care because he doesn't run as an ideologue and he doesn't run as principled. And I think Democrats sometimes and liberals, they get so angry at it. They're so offended by that instead of winning and looking at how you have to defeat that, they just kind of like sit there with their arms crossed and say it's so bad. So similarly, you had Donald Trump being able to say, you know, Dick Cheney is racist against Arab people. He killed a lot of Arab people in the Iraq War. And this is, again, the same guy who said that Israel should finish the job. So he's no like ally of Arabs. But again, he can go left, right. It doesn't matter. He can say whatever he wants. And all people, I think, respond to is they get that he's calling people out. And he can't be called out in the same way that his opponents can be.
And then there was the issue with Israel and Gaza, where I feel like I still go back to that moment where it was a Kamala Harris rally in Michigan. And of course, she was confronted by protesters in the audience. And they were asking what about the people in Gaza? And she said, I'm speaking. If you keep it up, you want Donald Trump, keep it up. Otherwise, I am speaking. And it just and then even after that, she proceeded to say, I am speaking again at other rallies as well. What was she thinking? It just, again, the people who were advising her, how could you say that to people at this point in time when there's a genocide happening? What do you expect people to think? And in a swing state, Jamal Bowman, I don't know if you saw this, Katie, but Jamal Bowman had an interview recently with Ronnie Akalik, where he offered to help in that state because apparently he has a lot of support in that area, and in particular with this issue with Israel and Gaza. Yeah. And the Kamala Harris campaign they wouldn't even let him help.
I mean, it was so shameful. And I know, like, what kind of the whole, anyone who got excited by I'm speaking is like, what kind of craven person? You know, this is the politics that we see. It's like a pseudo politics. It's really about personal expression. You know, we saw this with Hillary too. People got so excited about her journey as a woman. It's like, there's nothing feminist or like anti-racist about taking time to speak while people are talking about genocide. But I think to me, that's a real weaponization of identity politics that we see a lot, where like, if you're a woman or if you're a Black woman and you're like, I'm speaking, basically it's like, I'm going to be the same level of asshole as straight white men. And that's going to be like a winning thing to do, as opposed to saying, you know, I actually care about issues. So there's a lot of performative stuff that I think people who fancy themselves political but aren't political, they're just kind of narcissists and they identify with someone's journey and they're like, oh, that's so great. I love the way she said that. Like, you know, but yeah, I think that, you know, we saw with a lot of the interviews after the fact, people who worked on her campaign, they said that, you know, she was in this hard position because how could she insult her? How could she deviate from her, from the president, right? She was part of his administration. How could she criticize him? It's like, well, you guys were running apparently against fascism. So you're going to tell me that it was more important not to be rude and to respect norms than it was to defeat fascism?
It's a number of things for me that really, honestly, like, I didn't understand how the media continued to make it seem like she was doing better than she actually was.
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of gaslighting and lying. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of people were really shocked election night. And I talked to people on the ground, and no one I spoke to on the ground, except for one person, said that they were excited about supporting Kamala Harris. Most people said they were going to stay home. And we see the turnout was less this time around than it was in 2020. And I don't understand the level of gaslighting that came from the media. And it's almost like even now the Democratic Party doesn't want to sit down and take a hard look at what they did wrong. They're pointing fingers at the voters for not coming out to support or not being smart enough to understand what was in front of them, when in reality, the policies that Bernie Sanders ran on are still incredibly popular. And instead of being willing to embrace those policies, they choose to embrace their donors instead. And this is why they continue to lose. I saw something, an estimate recently, that if this trend continues with the Democratic Party, that they could lose New York State come next presidential election.
Yeah, and notice how some people are finally admitting Bernie was right. I'm not talking about you, obviously. I'm talking about like centrists and Dems. It's like, oh, that's convenient. Now that he's not running anymore, now you can give him credit, right, for his ideas. But yeah, I think that something with the Palestine issue again that you just brought up, it is pretty rich and telling that polls revealed that had she called for a ceasefire or said she wouldn't be arming Israel, that would have been a popular thing to do. And again, are you running against fascism? And if so, why don't you do the thing that's going to help you win? And apparently, as we know from the polls, like that was something that was popular. But I think it's a combination of having disdain for the base, a combination of, I think Biden probably is a real Zionist, a dyed-in-the-wool Zionist. I think Kamala's more kind of an empty shell of a person. I don't think she particularly cares, but I think she had advisors telling her that. And yeah, I mean, it's really disturbing. And I just think, again, knowing how limited they were by norms and not wanting to be rude, that really undermines the claim that you are running against fascism, or it undermines the claim that you care about fascism.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of that, I don't know if you heard this news, but Alan Dershowitz.
Oh yeah, my buddy.
Your pal Alan Dershowitz.
I may have to let him out. Sorry.
Hold
on, let me see. Sorry, let me see if this
okay.
Toy will distract him here. Okay. Yeah, Alan Dershowitz. Yeah.
Let
me just close the door. I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry about this. Hold on. Can you just sit and chill out with me? I probably have to give him a lot of snaps. Anyway. All right. Jesus. All right. Go. Sorry, I'm just going to leave the door open so we can go. Dershowitz.
So it was just reported that Alan Dershowitz is a contender for Trump's anti-Semitism envoy. I don't know if people have seen this. This was reported yesterday by the New York Post. It says that Harvard professor Alan Dershowitz is under consideration to serve as President Trump's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. Oh boy. I want to get your take on this one, Katie. Obviously, you had a one-on-one with Alan Dershowitz on Piers Morgan's show. How incredibly scary is this for people when we think about like censorship? Because Alan Dershowitz has been, heavy against like the protests, pro-Palestinian protests in particular.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Dershowitz kind of famously said he was doing something called like "Hurt a Jew, we sue you." It was really funny. He's like, "We're going to come for your boom boxes," which shows you how out of touch he is. But this was about the encampments. And, Alan Dershowitz is one of the many people who in a extremely disingenuous, but also ironically anti-Semitic way. And we'll get into why it's anti-Semitic in a second, but he conflates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And those things are very different. And in fact, the reason I think it's anti-Semitic is because a couple of reasons. One is it trivializes actual anti-Semitism. And what you have are people who don't take claims of anti-Semitism seriously because they're so used to people claiming something that's anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic, right? The other thing is that it leans into this dual loyalty trope, which is an anti-Semitic trope, right? Because if anti-Semitism is the same thing as anti-Zionism, what that means is that being Jewish is definitionally being a supporter of Israel and being a Zionist. And again, that's an anti-Semitic trope, right? That we're not like, I am a Jew, I live in the United States, but ultimately my loyalty is to Israel. And the people who make the argument that Zionism and Jewishness are the same, and by extension, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are the same, are people like the KKK, David Duke. You hear raging anti-Semites who talk about the Zionist this, the Jewish this, they use them interchangeably. And then AIPAC and Israel and the ADL, and it's really scary. The other reason it's so scary and irresponsible and anti-Semitic, ultimately, to conflate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which again, the premise of that conflation is that being Jewish is being Zionist. Being Jewish means you're a supporter of Israel. Is that, look, you have a country that is live streaming its genocide as we speak. It's claiming to act in the name of Jews, which it doesn't. But every time you say or suggest that anti-Semitism that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, you are reinforcing the false view that Jews are a monolith who support Israel. You're reinforcing the claim that Jews are, like, by nature and definition, Zionists. And it's really important to note that, Zionism used to be totally fringe. I mean, it became more mainstream for reasons we can get into, but it was fringe. And today, and Zionism is, of course, Judaism is a lot older than Zionism. And there are a lot of people, Jewish organizations, ranging from If Not Now to Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace is more kind of explicitly anti-Zionist than If Not Now, but both of them are very critical of Israel. And you have religious Jews who are anti-Zionist. You have secular Jews who are anti-Zionist. And it's funny when Zionists accuse Jews like me of being anti-Semites. I'm like, Jews only have a chance, honestly, of defeating anti-Semitism when Jews speak out against what Israel's doing. And I'm not saying that to justify or excuse anti-Semitism. And to be clear, there are people who are anti-Semites who, like, think of Jews like me, or of all Jews, as we are like a Bolshevik communist, and at the same time we're like both like the workers rising up and also the capitalists on top. Those people, it doesn't matter what Israel does, they're just anti-Semites, right? But you have a whole lot of other people who I don't think are particularly anti-Semitic, who are going to be vulnerable to anti-Semitic claims, because if you are being told, which Israel does, if you're being told that this is in the name of Jews, that Israel is the Jewish state and represents the Jews, and they're doing awful things, there's going to be blowback.
I'm really concerned it may get to a point where, especially if this goes through and he does become a part of, like, Trump's administration, Alan Dershowitz is a psycho. I call him psycho, lunatic. I'm really afraid it's going to get to the point in this country where they're going to say that we're not allowed to criticize the state of Israel at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is a psycho, as you pointed out, and thank you for that. I like the segment you did on my appearance on Pierce Morgan, which prepared me a little bit for not being too distracted by Bucky, because they didn't stop talking over me. Bucky's a nice, sweet guy, but these guys weren't. By these guys, I mean Alan Dershowitz and Jonathan Conricus, the former IDF head. But one of the things I want to bring up, but I wasn't able to, is that, you had Dershowitz is so dishonest, and going back against Trump, he's obviously a big Trump supporter, but Trump actually at the debate, the one debate that Biden did this time with Trump said something interesting, which was Biden was saying, the only people who want to keep fighting are Hamas. Israel doesn't want to fight. Israel doesn't want this war. And Trump, in his kind of like, radical truth telling at the same time as he's a pathological liar, he said, what are you talking about? Of course Israel wants to keep fighting. Israel wants the war, and they should get the job. They should finish the job. So I actually wanted to bring that up with Alan Dershowitz, because I wanted to be like, well, your buddy Donald Trump actually disagrees with you, because he thinks Israel is really interested in the war. That it's not that Israel wants to lay down its arms. It's just waiting for Hamas to give up. And another thing that's interesting, speaking of the Dersh, is that I think that the idea that Israel makes the world safer for Jews is not true, but it's also undermined by this lie. They like to say that October 7th was the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, which is irresponsible for many reasons. One is that, and civilians were killed on October 7th. I don't deny that. There were war crimes committed on October 7th. I don't deny that. At the same time, Hamas does have the legal right to fight combatants. I mean, there's a difference between civilians and combatants, and no one ever talks about that. Under international law, they have the right to fight the combatants who are occupying them. That's, again, different from civilians. But anyone who cares about the death of civilians would, of course, be first and foremost up in arms about what Israel's doing, which is why that anyone who asks you to condemn Hamas but doesn't talk about Israel's far, far more pervasive, far superior in terms of scope, volume, and weaponry, their crimes against humanity, their actual genocide, they're totally full of it. These people don't care about the sanctity of life. They just care about certain lives. But the irony is that, Israel has like one job to do, right? And a lot of people genuinely think well, maybe Israel does some bad stuff, but it's unfortunate. This is the price to pay when you're trying to make the world safe for Jews, right? They really do want to. If Israel doesn't protect the Jews, who else will? But if you look at what they did with the hostages, they killed their own hostages. They bombed places they knew their hostages were. They implemented the Hannibal Directive, which says that you kill your people who are being kidnapped. In other words, it's better to kill the people than let them be hostages, because you don't want to have to negotiate, because they were so kind of bogged down and humiliated by Gilad Shalit, who they traded a bunch of Palestinian prisoners for. Now, again, this is not the behavior of a government that really cares about the sanctity of Jewish life and about saving Jewish lives. They'd be negotiating if they cared about that, right? They'd be trading prisoners. And that's because people, I think, get more and more that, Israel is not about Jewish safety. It's a political project, right? And it's not about Jewish lives. They hide behind that. And that, I mean, the irony is, like, I don't think that's okay. It's not okay to be a place where you value Jewish life more than other lives. That's racist. That's deplorable. It's certainly a violation of the kind of Jewish values with which I was raised, which was never again for anyone, not just never again for Jews. But it's just ironic, because even within their own racist framework of claiming to be, the land of the Jews that protects the Jews against the people who want to kill us, it's like you have one job to do and you don't even do that job. And I think that's an important thing, because I think that reaches people who are brainwashed in a way that other things won't reach them. Because once you kind of break the spell that Israel is a safe place for Jews and Israel exists to make the world safer for Jews, I think then you can question lots of things. That's not for someone like you, obviously, Sabby. You totally get this, but I'm talking about, and it's not really for people who watch your show or my show. I'm talking about like mainstream people who are really raised on this ideology. I think it's a useful thing to tell them. If you kind of break that, it's like a Jenga thing. Like you pull out this bottom piece of it, and then everything else kind of crumbles. Yeah.
There's also this measure of intent, and this is something I wish people would use more, especially towards people like Pierce Morgan, who continues to say, well, no, it's not a genocide because there's roughly about 50,000 people that have been killed, which we push back on that because, number one, Ralph Nader did the math on this already. If you count the number of bombs and the density of the area, obviously it's more than 50,000 people that have been killed. Plus the health ministry underreports the numbers. So there's that. Yeah. But there's a lot of focus on that number, and that's so that they can say Israel did not commit genocide, in my opinion. But there's the issue with the word intent. And according to the UN, the definition of genocide also includes the intent to. Right. And so you can always point to not just the actions of the Likud party, but you can also point to the rhetoric that has come from the Likud party that's on video for everybody to see.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, this is interesting. Craig McIver. Have you had Craig McIver on? The former? Yeah, you did, right? So he points out that, usually the hard, and he's a longtime human rights lawyer who resigned from the UN over their failure to basically deal with the Gaza and with integrity. He points out that usually the hard part in proving genocide is that you have to comb through the records and try to find the intent. But with Israel, they're so used to impunity that they said these things out loud. They said it. They're human animals and we're going to treat them as such. Cut off the water, the electricity, no food. The president, Herzog, said this discourse about civilians, no, that's nonsense. They're all responsible because they voted in Hamas. You have Amalek, Netanyahu referring to Amalek, and the lesson of Amalek is you kill all men, women, children, and livestock. Wait, is that and animals. So yeah, as you pointed out, I mean, the intent is there, and also look, I think that what are the odds that Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, people, it's so ridiculous to say, well, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are just anti-Semitic institutions. It's so stupid. But okay, for argument's sake, let's say they are, which they're not, and there's no evidence that they are. Is B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, are they a bunch of self-loathing Jews? It's just preposterous, and it's offensive to the definition of genocide, which was developed, by the way, by Lemkin, by someone Jewish. after the Holocaust happened. And it is it's just basic, like, look, you have Ari Nair, who is the founder of Human Rights Watch, who's not particularly anti-Israel or anti-Zionist. And he said that Israel had the right to go after Hamas and try to dismantle Hamas after October 7th. And he didn't think it was genocide at first. And then because of the way they block food, he said, yeah, it is genocide. Then you had the guy from the ICC who was a Holocaust, and Nair is a Holocaust survivor himself. Then you have a guy from the ICC who was on the panel who also said that it was right to go out. He was on the unanimous panel that said the arrest warrant should be issued. So, it's kind of messed up. Also, I always feel conflicted about this, because the truth is, like, we shouldn't have to rely on Holocaust survivors or Jewish people to believe claims that something's a genocide or apartheid or war crimes. It should be enough when Palestinians who are at the receiving end of this tell us it is. But I bring this up because I think, again, just strategically, and again, this is not your audience or my audience, but the larger world, I think there are people who, if you say that, they're more likely to believe it. And so I think we kind of have to do both things at the same time, which is show how it's a myth that it's anti-Semitic, but also, believe Palestinians.
That's right. And a lot of people don't realize just how much AIPAC is embedded into our politics here in the United States. I was playing an audio recently where it was AIPAC meeting, and they were discussing how they were actually actively recruiting Black teenagers in high school to be a part of the Congressional Black Caucus. They get people really early to get on board for their agenda. And this is part of the reason why, again, like I've said before, regardless if it's the Progressive Caucus or the Congressional Black Caucus, at the end of the day, you'll see that they are in line with what AIPAC wants, because a lot of these people have already been handpicked. A lot of times people don't realize this. Even someone like Cory Booker was already selected. They had already picked out certain people. Hakeem Jeffries is another one. And that's why you see them go, to bat for Israel and not people in their district. Richie Torres is a perfect example. You never really hear him talk about the suffering that people have in the Bronx. He's talking about the suffering that is happening, or what he calls the suffering happening to people in Israel.
Yeah. I mean, I think Adam Johnson has this article. I don't have the stats on me, but it's like, Richie Torres represents, I think, one of the poorest districts in the entire country. And like the ratio, he talks about Israel like 40 times more than he talks about poverty, or something insane like that. I mean, I think that, Hakeem Jeffries saying Israel today, Israel tomorrow, basically sounding like, one of these like Dixiecrat segregationists talking about segregation. And also, of course, Bakari Sellers, who's like has had his picture taken with Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson, and shows up at AIPAC. Israel's been very good at like weaponizing identity politics, and they do a lot of pink washing, and they do a lot of like, we're anti-racist and look how diverse our army is, and look, like you get to see like a soldier right after he's wiped out a village gets to propose to another man. And isn't that progressive? Like we have gay soldiers who commit genocide, not just straight soldiers who commit genocide. By the way, same-sex marriage is illegal in Israel.
Yep.
Yeah. You can't even have a mixed like interfaith marriage in Israel. You have to go like to Rome or like Cyprus. That's what people do. And Jews can't even get married without an Orthodox rabbi. You can't even have a Reform rabbi. So if you want to do that, you also have to go and then come back to Israel. I was just going to say one more for you, Katie. I know you're working on a documentary, and I want to hear a little bit about that as well. Yeah. That actually, I was about when I just started talking, and I was like, I bet you, I had a feeling we're going to bring up a similar thing. So yeah, I'm working on this documentary about Jewish Holocaust survivors who are speaking out against what's happening in Gaza, who are saying, not in our name. They're saying never again for anyone, and never again is now. Now, Israel is saying never again is now, but it's the totally opposite message. For them, never again means we're going to kill a bunch of people who had nothing to do with the Holocaust. And this, I think, is an important project for a lot of reasons. First of all, the people I'm interviewing are incredible. Like, I didn't even know. I knew they'd be like really cool people, but like, so some of them you've heard of, like Gabor Mate, who was a baby during the Holocaust, and he's been excellent on this issue. And he has a fascinating story because he started out as a real Zionist. Then he had to defend the anti-Zionist position in a debate. And he was like, oh, wait, this doesn't make sense, actually. So he became a major critic of Israel. He's a physician by training, and he practiced as a physician, and he went to the West Bank and was like cried for weeks afterwards. So he's one of the characters. Then there's this woman, Marion Ingram, who's amazing. She's from Germany. She survived the war. She lost like her grandmother, aunt, and uncle. Then she came to the United States from Germany, became active in the civil rights movement. She's kind of like a radical Forrest Gump, because she starts telling me these stories and she's like, so yeah, and she's not a name dropper. She's just telling stories because I'm interviewing her. She's like, so yeah, then Jimmy came over, Jimmy being James Baldwin. And she's like, yeah, then I had a flashback at this event. I was like having a panic attack. So then Bayard helped me, Bayard Rustin. Then she like really like Forrest Gump. Then she takes a bus and there's like no room on the bus. And some old man is like, you can take my seat. And this old woman's like, come sit next to me. And it's Fannie Lou Hamer. And then Fannie Lou Hamer is like, you need to open up a freedom school in Mississippi, which she does. And then she tells a story about like, her husband's like, oh, make sure she tells you about how Stokely Carmichael saved her life.
Whoa.
And I mean, so there's that. And then she becomes a major, then she starts protesting outside the White House, like in October 2023, every week. And when we visited her, it was really beautiful because she, it was a Saturday and it was really nice because it was very intergenerational. That's one of the really nice things about this movement, is that it is very intergenerational. And she and a bunch of young kids and people of varying ages were in front of the White House. And it was really, I mean, it was very moving and heartbreaking. And she was reading the names of all the 15-year-olds who have been killed. Because one of the things they started doing is reading the names of people killed like by year. So the first one they did were people 0 to 1. I mean, babies 0 to 1. She's amazing. Another character is this guy, Renee Lichtman, who was a hidden child and now is protesting the Holocaust Museum he used to be a speaker at, because he used to lecture on this. And he got really upset that the Holocaust Museum, which had made connections before, like they talked about Rwanda, right? They got that Never Again wasn't just about Jews. Somehow when it comes to Gaza, they don't make that connection. So he has been doing protests across the street from this Holocaust museum. And then there are amazing people in London. There's a whole coalition, Holocaust Survivors and Descendants Against Genocide, which includes people like Stephen Kaposh, who people may have seen. He's like at a lot of the rallies in London. He's like adorable and is always speaking out. He's in a lot of like social media videos. He's Hungarian. And we also spoke to Haim Brashith, who people may recognize that name. I had him on my show recently. He's a 79-year-old son of Holocaust survivors. He was raised in Israel and he moved to London, is now 79, battling cancer. And he spoke at a protest at the Israeli ambassador's residence. He said that Israel was not going to be able to defeat Hamas. And for that crime, he was arrested because under their anti-terrorism laws, he was arrested. Yeah. Asa Winstanley also had his home raided. There's another activist, Sarah Wilkinson. I just interviewed Tony Greenstein, who wrote this amazing book, who also was arrested. Zionism During the Holocaust, the Weaponization of Memory in the Service of State and Nation. And speaking of the documentary, you know, I think it's clear to anyone watching this show that Israel weaponizes the Holocaust and weaponizes anti-Semitism for political gain, right? For very cynical reasons. But something I didn't know about until more recently was how much they mistreated actual survivors. Like, Israel has a very complex relationship towards the Holocaust. No, I don't want to say complex. A very craven relationship towards the Holocaust, where they weaponize it and they use it, but they also have a lot of disdain towards survivors and towards Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. They see them as like, you know, lambs who went to slaughter. And that's why Israel is kind of obsessed with like being the new Jew, you know, not the old diaspora Jew. They don't like religious Jews. They don't like Yiddish. They wouldn't let people, they really made it hard for you to speak Yiddish. They would like shut down Yiddish productions of plays. They really, again, like they call Jews like me self-loathing, but there's a lot of self-loathing among Zionists and the founders of Israel. They really hated They accepted a lot of the hatred of things that are considered Jewish. And so they mistreated survivors. They there's a slur called sapon, which means soap in Hebrew, and that's a reference to, it's not true, but there was this myth that like Nazis made soap out of Jewish people's bodies, like they turned their fat into soap, but it's not true. But the point is that they thought it was true and they used it as a slur. Like they're contemptuous enough of survivors to like have a name for survivors that is based on Nazis turning them into soap. They also, and Norman Finkelstein writes about this in his amazing book, The Holocaust Industry. We'll also be interviewing him because we're also interviewing survivors' children. He writes about this in The Holocaust Industry that, Germany paid reparations for the Holocaust, but they didn't go to the survivors. A lot of survivors lived in poverty and continue, to the extent that they're alive, to live in poverty because they took those reparations and they gave it to the government to do whatever it wanted. They built bridges. They even put it, according to Chaim Brashith, who's a historian who wrote a book called An Army Like No Other about the IDF. They spent that money that was supposed to be for survivors on their like atomic bomb project.
Wow. Well, this sounds like a really good, this documentary is going to be really interesting because, and I think now is definitely the time that, is it going to be, when you do the documentary, is it going to be posted on your YouTube channel or?
I'm hoping, what I've been posting some like, I want to actually release it, hopefully like do a wider release than that. But we definitely have some clips on YouTube. I've done like, I did the whole Haim interview that I put on YouTube, and that there'll be like parts of it probably in the documentary because the characters are all over. They're in Vancouver, they're in London, Brussels. So I can't like constantly go visit them all the time because I'd be flying all over constantly. So I do these like updates with them. So I did that update with Haim the other day, and that'll probably be in the documentary as well. Also want to just mention one other character named Adam Politzer, who's amazing, Hungarian, and his mother and he and his uncle were the only. His father left for Chile right before World War II broke out. He wanted to bring the family over and then couldn't because World War II broke out. Adam's mother and grandparents and cousins and uncle and aunt, except for one uncle, were all killed by the Nazis. Then Adam was able to reunite with his father in Chile. He is an architect, becomes an architect, is part of the Allende government. He's in the housing ministry. And if people don't know, Allende was the first democratically elected Marxist president. Great guy. Of course, overthrown in a CIA-backed violent coup led by Pinochet, who implemented a neoliberal torture regime, basically. And so Adam not only survives the Holocaust, he's a hidden child, not only loses his family to the Holocaust, then he's imprisoned by Pinochet. And then gets asylum in Canada. But yeah, so these are just really amazing people. And I think it's really important because thanks to Israel's PR, like the world doesn't know that there's a whole movement of like radical Jews for whom their Jewish identity is it's not a like supremacist identity at all. Like, I mean, there's so many Jewish supremacists who support Israel, but there's a whole tradition and culture of Jews who are internationalists, who are all about solidarity, who are about the diaspora, right? The fact that the Jews didn't have a country, they were all over the world. And there's a whole actual like idea. It's a Yiddish word. It means here-ness, which is like, because for Zionists, anti-Semitism is needed. Like anti-Semitism is the justification for Zionism. So you don't fight Zionism. You don't fight anti-Semitism. You build a separate nation because of anti-Semitism. Whereas Bundists, that's an anti-Zionist orientation. And anti-Zionists would talk about here-ness. Like you fight for rights, you fight for justice, you fight for equality wherever you are. You fight anti-Semitism where you are, and you become part of that culture wherever you are, as opposed to, and that's why there was collaboration between Nazis and Zionists. They worked hand in hand. getting Jews to Palestine. And Zionists blocked getting. Now, I want to be clear. I don't mean individual, like kind of powerless, random people who believed in Zionism before it became a project. And the Zionist leaders knew that it was going to be ethnic cleansing. They knew it was not a land without a people for a people without a land. But a lot of people didn't know what it was like. And you also, by the way, had Jews living in Palestine, either from there or Jews who went there, like religious Jews who went there, but they didn't want a state. They didn't want to become a Jewish majority. Anyway, it is fascinating how you did have Zionists blocking rescues because they didn't want Jews to be able to go to anywhere but Palestine. They also didn't want, they only wanted certain types of Jews to be able to come to Palestine. So they wanted like strong young ones who could like be in the military and work the land. And you also had a really scary quote from Ben Gurion, who became an Israeli prime minister, where he said something like, if I could choose between saving like twice as many Jews by sending them to England versus half as many Jews by sending them to Palestine, I'd do Palestine.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Well, Katie, thank you so much. Where can people follow your work?
So at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show, also at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. I'm live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. I know you and I have to figure out a way to, oh my God, sorry. Live at 7 p.m. on Tuesdays. The next 2 weeks, because Tuesdays, New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve fall on Tuesdays, I'm going to do my show on Thursday nights. But actually, one of them is going to be an interview with this guy, Tony Greenstein. I really recommend this book, Zionism During the Holocaust. And he talks a lot about all the collaborating that took place between Zionists and the Nazis. Yeah. So, and then, on Twitter, and of course I'll be releasing my film. So stand by for that. And, yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. And then Useful Idiots, which I co-host with Aaron Mate.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.